The trail is quiet. Too quiet. Your boot hangs in the air an inch above the dirt, and something deep in the back of your skull, something older than your training and older than your reason, tells you not to set it down. So you freeze. Sweat slides into your eyes and you don't dare blink it away. Somewhere ahead of you, a bird that is not a bird calls out twice and then goes silent. You have been in this country for 6 days. If you live long enough, you will learn that the silence here is never empty. The silence is watching you. And in the next 4 seconds, the silence is going to decide whether you ever go home. Welcome to the deadliest ecosystem a young man has ever been dropped into. In the natural world, every creature is born into a set of rules. The gazelle is born knowing the shape of a lion. The rabbit is born knowing the shadow of a hawk. But you were not born for this place. You were raised in a small town in Ohio or Georgia or California. You played baseball. You had a girl. You had a car with a bad transmission. And then a letter arrived with your name on it. Now you are standing in a jungle on the other side of the planet, and none of the rules you learned back home apply to you anymore. Out here, you are the specimen, and the odds were never on your side. Over the next hour, we are going to walk you through this environment the way a naturalist walks you through the Serengeti. We will study the climate that wants to rot you from the outside in. We will study the terrain that hides your predators. We will study the enemy who was born on this ground and knows it the way you know the back of your own hand. And we will study the small, quiet killers you will never even see coming. By the end, you will understand something the survivors already know in their bones. You would not last a week. But before we begin, do this small thing. Tap that subscribe button. The stories we tell here are stories that fewer and fewer people alive still remember, and keeping them alive is the whole point. When you first arrive, they have a name for you, and it is not a kind one. You are a cherry, new, green, untested. And to the men who have already lived through a few months, you are the most dangerous thing in the platoon. Not because you mean any harm, but because you do not yet know the rules that keep a man alive out here, and your mistakes can get others killed right alongside you. So the veterans keep their distance. They will not learn your name too quickly. They have watched too many new men come and go to spend their hearts on one who may not last the month. You will have to earn your way into that circle the hard way, by living long enough to stop being a cherry. And the learning curve here is the steepest a young man will ever face, because the lessons are written in blood, and there are no second chances on most of them. Back home, a mistake means a bad grade or a dented fender. Here, walking too close to the man ahead of you means one grenade takes you both. Lighting a cigarette at night means a sniper a quarter-mile off now knows exactly where your head is. Following the same trail twice means the enemy was waiting on it the second time. Everything you need to know to stay alive, you have to learn in the first few weeks, while you are also more exhausted and more frightened than you have ever been in your life. Most animals get years to learn their world from their mothers. You get days, and the jungle grades hard. Let us start with the air itself, because the air is the first thing here that tries to kill you. You step off the helicopter and the heat hits you like a wet wool blanket pressed over your whole body. It is 105 degrees. The humidity sits near 100%. You are not standing in weather. You are standing inside a lung. Within minutes, your uniform is soaked through, not from rain, but from your own body trying and failing to cool itself. Back home, sweat evaporates and carries the heat away. Here, the air is already so full of water that your sweat has nowhere to go. It just sits on your skin. Your body's cooling system, the one that kept your ancestors alive on the open plains for 100,000 years, has been switched off. A gazelle that overheats on the savannah finds shade and waits for the cool of the evening. You do not get that mercy. You carry 60, 70, sometimes 80 pounds of gear on your back, and you carry it up hills, through mud, across rivers, hour after hour, while the sun cooks you from above and the ground steams you from below. Men drop from heat exhaustion before a single shot is fired. Their hearts race, their skin goes strange and dry. They stop making sense, and if nobody catches it in time, they die on a trail that has no name. In a war their families back home can barely find on a map. And when the heat finally breaks, it breaks into rain. For half of every year the monsoon comes, and it does not come as a shower. It comes as a wall of water that falls for days without stopping. Your boots fill, your socks turn to soup, your feet, trapped in that wet leather for days on end, begin to swell and wrinkle and split. The skin peels away in white sheets. This is trench foot, and it has been killing the feet of soldiers since long before you were born. Left alone, it turns black. Left alone long enough, it costs you toes, then a foot, then a leg. In the animal kingdom, a creature that cannot walk, cannot hunt, and cannot flee. It simply dies. Out here, the same law holds. A man who cannot walk is a man the jungle has already marked. So the climate alone, before you have even met your enemy, is doing everything in its power to break you down. It wants to overheat you, drown you, and rot your body 1 square inch at a time. And this is only the beginning. Because now we have to talk about the ground you are standing on. To your eyes, fresh off the plain, the jungle looks like one solid green wall. But the jungle is not one thing. It is 3 worlds stacked on top of each other, and each one is designed as if on purpose to work against you. High above your head is the canopy, a roof of leaves so thick that on the brightest day it can be dim as dusk on the jungle floor. That roof hides the sun that would guide you, and it hides the helicopters that might save you. A man can be bleeding to death in a clearing the size of a living room, and the aircraft sent to find him can pass directly overhead and never see a thing. Below the canopy is the tangle, a middle world of vines and branches and broad, wet leaves that slap your face and hook your gear and slow every single step. And below that is the floor where you live. The floor is where the elephant grass grows, blades taller than a man, edged like a saw, sharp enough to open the skin of your forearms as you push through. The floor is where the mud swallows your boots to the ankle, and the floor is where your enemy has spent years learning to disappear. Because here is the cruel truth of this terrain. It does not hide you, it hides them. You are a stranger crashing through the brush in a uniform that was cut for a training field in Georgia. They grew up in these tree lines. They know which trail floods in the rain and which one holds. They know where the ground gives a hollow sound and where it holds a man's weight. To you, the jungle is a wall you fight through. To them, the jungle is a house they have lived in their whole lives, and you have just kicked open the door. And then there is the ground beneath the ground. Because in some parts of this country, the earth is hollow. Beneath the rice paddies and the villages runs a second world, a network of tunnels dug by hand over many years, mile after mile of them, deep enough to hold hospitals and kitchens and sleeping quarters and entire companies of fighters. A patch of land can look empty, sound empty, sit silent under the noon sun, and hold 100 armed men a few feet below your boots. You can sweep a village, find nothing, call it clear, and turn your back. And behind you the ground opens, and the enemy rises out of the earth like something out of a nightmare. In nature, the most dangerous predator is the one you cannot see. On this ground, the most dangerous predator lives inside the ground itself. Now, before we go on to meet that predator face to face, take stock of what you are carrying, because the weight on your back is its own quiet enemy. Your rifle. Hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Grenades, water and never enough of it, food for days, a poncho, a shovel, a first aid kit, extra batteries, extra belts of ammunition for the machine gunner, maybe a mortar round or two that somebody has to carry, and today, that somebody is you. It adds up to the weight of a small person strapped to your spine, and you carry that second person up every hill and across every stream in that 100-degree heat. Every pound is a cruel trade. The more water you carry, the slower you move and the sooner you tire. The less water you carry, the faster you fall to the heat. The more ammunition you carry, the longer you last in a fight, and the more likely you are to be too worn down to win it. There is no right answer. There is only the weight and the heat and the hills, and the knowledge that when the shooting starts, you will have to move fast and think faster, while your body is already running on empty. A cheetah can sprint, but only for seconds, and only a few times a day before its body gives out. You are asked to be ready to sprint at any moment, all day, every day for a year, with a small person on your back. No animal alive is built for that, and neither are you. Which brings us at last to the apex predator of this ecosystem. Not a tiger, not a snake, a man. A soldier who has been fighting on this land longer than you have been able to shave. He does not wear the heavy gear you carry. He moves light, sometimes in nothing but sandals cut from old tires, and he knows he does not need to beat your army. He only needs to outlast it. He has watched foreign armies come to this country before yours, armies that looked just as strong and just as certain, and he has watched every one of them leave. Patience is his greatest weapon, and patience is the one weapon you were never issued. He does not fight you the way you were trained to expect. There is no line of enemy soldiers standing in a field waiting to trade fire. That is not how a smaller force survives against a bigger one. Instead, he studies you. He learns the trails you favor because they are easy. He learns the clearings you rest in because they offer shade. He learns the hour you grow careless because the heat has worn you down. And then, at the time and place of his choosing, and never yours, he strikes for 30 seconds and vanishes back into the green before you can even tell which direction the fire came from. This is the ambush, and it is the beating heart of this war. Picture it. Your patrol is strung out along a narrow trail, tired, thirsty, watching the man in front and trusting the man behind. The lead man crosses an invisible line on the ground. In that instant, the whole world comes apart. A machine gun opens up from a hidden position that was chosen days ago for this exact moment. The men caught in the open have a heartbeat, maybe two, to throw themselves down before the rounds find them. And here is the part that breaks men's minds. You cannot shoot back at what you cannot see. You fire into the trees, into the noise, into the muzzle flashes, hoping. And then, as fast as it began, the guns fall silent. The enemy is already gone, melting back through tunnels and trails he mapped before you were ever born, leaving you with your wounded and your dead and the ringing in your ears. Study the numbers behind a single ambush, and you begin to see why this style of war is so merciless. A handful of fighters, well hidden, can shatter a force many times their size, take almost no losses, and slip away clean. In the natural world, we would call this the perfect strategy of a small predator against a larger one. Strike from concealment, take what you can, spend nothing you do not have to, and live to hunt again tomorrow. The lion that fights every buffalo head-on does not grow old. The lion that picks its moment does. Your enemy has grown very, very old at this. But the enemy who carries a rifle is not the only enemy waiting for you on that trail. And he may not even be the one most likely to kill you, because this ground has been seeded, quite literally, with 1,000 silent traps. And each one was set by human hands with the patience of a spider building a web. In nature, the trapdoor spider does not chase its prey. It waits, buried, still, for the ground itself to be crossed. On this ground, that same cold patience has been turned into an art. Here is a tripwire, thin as a strand of hair, stretched ankle-high across the trail you are walking right now. You are tired. Your eyes are down, watching your footing in the mud. You do not see it. Your boot catches it, and behind you a grenade that was tied to a tree 3 days ago tears the air apart. Here is a patch of ground that looks like every other patch, but the man who dug the pit beneath it sharpened stakes of bamboo, hardened them in fire and set them pointing up, and covered the whole thing with a thin mat of leaves. You step, the mat gives way, and your leg goes down onto the stakes. In the animal world, the pit is one of the oldest tricks there is, dug by insects and by men alike, because it costs the hunter nothing and it never sleeps. And these traps do something to a man beyond the wound itself. They rob him of the one thing that keeps him moving forward. They rob him of trust in the ground under his own feet. Once you have seen a friend caught by a trap, every step you take becomes a question. Is this the one? Is this the patch that gives way? Is this the wire I do not see? You slow down, you second guess. And a soldier who cannot trust the ground he walks on is a soldier who is already half beaten, worn down not by a battle, but by the endless waiting for one. This is the true genius of it. The trap that never goes off still does its work, because the fear of it is with you every waking hour. So the climate is trying to rot you. The terrain is hiding your enemy. The enemy is picking you apart from the shadows, and the ground itself is laced with patient little machines built to take your legs. And you have not yet met the smallest predators of all, the ones you cannot see, even when you are looking right at them. The ones that have killed more soldiers across more wars than any rifle ever forged. Meet the mosquito. She weighs almost nothing. She makes a sound so small you can sleep right through it. And in this part of the world she carries malaria in her body, a parasite that she injects into your blood with a bite you will not even remember in the morning. Days later, The fever comes. Your temperature climbs until you are shaking so hard your teeth rattle. Then the chills, so deep you pile on every blanket you can find and still cannot get warm in 100-degree heat. The fever breaks and you think it is over, and then it comes back and back and back. Malaria has taken more fighting men out of more armies than bullets have. In the quiet math of this war, the mosquito is a deadlier predator than any man with a gun, and there is no way to shoot back at her. She is not alone. The leeches wait in the wet grass and the slow water, and they find the gaps in your clothing, and they attach to your skin and drink, swelling fat and dark. And you may not feel a thing until you strip down at the end of the day and find them clinging to your legs, your waist, places you would rather not name. Pull one off wrong and the wound keeps bleeding and turns bad in the heat. In the streams that you must cross and must drink from, there are smaller things still. Creatures too small to see that turn your guts to water and empty your body of the fluid it is already desperate to keep. Dehydration in this heat is not discomfort. It is a countdown, and every scratch, every cut, every insect bite becomes its own small crisis, because in this wet heat nothing heals. A shaving nick, a thorn scratch, a blister that pops inside a wet boot, any tiny break in the skin becomes a doorway. The infection sets in fast. The skin around it goes hot and red and angry, and what would have been nothing back home becomes jungle rot, an open sore that spreads and weeps and will not close as long as you are out here in the damp. Your own skin, the wall that is supposed to keep the world out, is failing one small breach at a time. In the wild, a wound that will not heal is a death sentence on a slow timer. Out here it is the same, and the timer is always running. Now let the sun go down, because nothing prepares you for the jungle at night. The canopy that dimmed the day turns the night into something absolute, a black so complete you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. And into that blackness, the sounds pour in. Insects by the million, things moving in the brush. And you cannot tell, you truly cannot tell, whether that snapping twig 30 feet away is a startled animal or a man crawling toward your position with a blade. So you sit in your hole through the long hours, straining your eyes at a darkness that gives you nothing back, and your mind, starved of anything real to see, begins to build shapes out of the black. Every soldier who has done it will tell you the same thing. The night is when the fear has you completely. This is the enemy's favorite hour, and he chose it on purpose. The dark erases your advantages. Your aircraft cannot see. Your artillery cannot be sure of you from him. Your numbers mean less when no one can tell who is where. And so the probe comes in the small hours, a shape testing your line, drawing your fire so a watcher can map exactly where your guns are for the assault that follows. You shoot at movement and pray you are not shooting at your own men crawling back from a listening post. In the animal world, a great many predators hunt at night for exactly this reason, because darkness belongs to the one who is comfortable in it, and you were never given the chance to grow comfortable in this one. And then there is the enemy you cannot tell from a friend, which may be the cruelest test this war sets for you. You walk into a village. There are old men, women, children, farmers bent over their rice. Somewhere among them, perhaps, is the person who set the trap that took your friend's leg this morning. Perhaps not. Perhaps the farmer smiling at you now will pick up a rifle the moment your back is turned. Or perhaps he is exactly what he appears to be, a man who wants nothing more than for every army on earth to leave his fields alone. You cannot know. And you have seconds to decide, over and over, day after day, and the weight of getting it wrong in either direction is a weight no young man should ever have to carry. There is no clear predator here, and no clear prey, and that is what breaks something inside a man. In the natural world, the lines are clean. The wolf knows the deer, the hawk knows the mouse. But you have been dropped into a war with no uniforms on the other side, where the enemy melts into the very people you were sent to protect, and where every face is a question you cannot answer, and cannot afford to answer wrong. The fear of the ambush is bad. The fear that you cannot tell friend from foe is worse, because it never lets you feel safe among the living any more than among the trees. Consider even the simple act of crossing a rice paddy, because nothing out here is simple. The paddy is open ground, flat and bright, with a village and a tree line watching from the far side. And to cross it you must wade out into water and mud that grips your boots and slows you to a crawl, in full view, with nowhere to hide, while somewhere in that tree line, an unseen gun decides whether today is the day. Every open space is a gamble, every tree line is a question. You spend your days choosing between the cover that hides your enemy and the open ground that hides nothing at all, and neither choice is safe, and you must choose anyway, again and again, until your tour runs out, or your luck does. And let us not forget that this is, after all, a jungle, and the jungle was full of teeth long before any army arrived to fight in it. There are snakes here whose bite can drop a man before help can reach him, and they lie exactly where you must put your hands and feet, in the grass, in the trees, along the banks of the streams you cross. There are things in the rivers you would rather not meet. There are insects beyond counting, some that sting, some that burrow, some that carry the fevers we have already named. The real animals of this place go about their ancient business with no interest in your war, and every so often one of them reminds you that in this ecosystem, man was never meant to sit at the top of the food chain at all. You might ask how an enemy with so little can keep fighting an army with so much, and the answer is another lesson the natural world teaches again and again. It is not the strongest who lasts. It is the most efficient. Everything your enemy needs to keep fighting travels down hidden paths through the mountains and the green, carried on backs and bicycles, hand to hand, mile after mile, a supply line made not of trucks and highways, but of sheer human will. Bomb it, and the water finds a new way downhill. Cut one path and 3 others open. You are trying to stop a river with your hands, and he needs so little to keep going. A handful of rice, a few rounds, a place to sleep in the ground. He does not need the mountains of supply your army must haul across an ocean to keep you fed and armed and fueled. That is his terrible advantage. The more a creature needs to survive, the more ways there are to starve it. Your enemy has whittled his needs down to almost nothing, and a predator that needs almost nothing is a predator that is almost impossible to kill. You were built for comfort and sent to fight a foe built for hunger, and hunger in a long war usually wins. Say the moment comes, and you are hit. Out here, being wounded is not the end of the danger. It is the start of a whole new race against the clock. You are down, bleeding, in the middle of a firefight, and the men around you must now decide whether to expose themselves to drag you to cover. The medic crawls to you through the same fire that put you down, and he works on you with his bare hands while rounds crack overhead, trying to stop the bleeding long enough to get you to the one thing that can truly save you, the helicopter. But the helicopter cannot land in a hot zone without becoming a target the size of a house, and it cannot find you under that thick canopy, and it may be many minutes or many miles away when you need it in seconds. So your friends must carry you, or hack a spot clear by hand, or hold off the enemy long enough for the aircraft to drop through a gap in the trees while the door gunner answers the tree line. Many men were saved this way, plucked from the jungle and in a surgeon's hands within the hour, a speed of rescue no war before had ever managed. And many men bled out waiting for a bird that could not reach them in time. Whether you live or die can come down to something as cruel and simple as how far you happen to be from a place a helicopter could reach. Through all of this, your body is quietly starving. The food you carry is heavy, so you carry little, and what you carry is dense and dull, and never quite enough for the furnace your body has become. You are burning thousands of calories a day hauling that load through that heat, and you cannot replace them, and so the pounds fall off you week by week until your uniform hangs loose on a frame gone lean and hard and hollow at the cheeks. Add the fevers that will not let you keep food down, and the sickness that empties you from the inside, and a strong young man can waste to a shadow of himself in a matter of months. A body cannot fight a war and starve at the same time forever. Something has to give, and out here, sooner or later, it always does. And death here does not always come from a face you could see, even if the jungle allowed it. Some of it falls from the sky, impersonal and enormous. The big guns fire from miles away at coordinates on a map, and a mistake in a number, a shift in the wind, a line crossed on a chart, can bring that fire down on the very men it was meant to protect. The shells do not know whose blood they are spilling. In the roar and confusion of a fight, in the dark, in the rain, with everyone moving and no one certain, the line between the enemy's fire and your own side's fire can blur, and men have died on the wrong end of a weapon that was pointed at them by accident. It is one more way this war could take you, and one more way it spared no one the fear. And someone has to walk at the very front out ahead of everyone, and today that someone might be you. They call it walking point, and it is the loneliest and most dangerous job in the whole patrol. The point man is the first to reach the tripwire, the first to cross the killing line, the first the hidden gun is waiting for. His eyes have to catch what everyone behind him will miss: the wire, the turned leaf, the too quiet clearing, the freshly disturbed dirt. He reads the jungle like a page, and he cannot afford to skip a single word, because the men strung out behind him are trusting their lives to what he sees and what he fails to see. Hour after hour of that focus wrings a man dry. And when your turn comes to take the point, you learn what real fear is. The fear of being the first to arrive at whatever the jungle has set out for you today. And you are asked to do all of this while barely sleeping at all. There is no safe night out here, no bed, no locked door, no long stretch of true rest. You sleep in shifts in a hole in the ground, an hour here, an hour there, one ear open, one hand near your rifle, and the monsoon soaking you through while you try. Night after night of that, and the exhaustion piles into a debt your body can never repay. Your thoughts slow, your reactions dull. You begin to see and hear things that are not there. A tired animal in the wild is a dead animal, because it cannot run fast enough or think quick enough when the moment comes. You are that tired animal every single day, and you must somehow stay sharp enough to live anyway. Even the land itself does not come through this untouched. In places the green is stripped away entirely, whole forests turned brown and bare, hillsides churned to raw earth and craters by the endless bombing until they look less like a jungle and more like the surface of the moon. You march across ground that has been fought over so many times, it no longer holds a single living tree, past the wreckage of what earlier battles left behind. It is a strange and lonely feeling, to fight in a place where the war has already killed even the landscape, and to know that you are only the newest creature passing through a wound in the earth that will outlast every man on both sides of the fight. And nothing, not the movies, not the training, prepares you for the sheer noise of it when a fight begins. The crack of rounds passing close enough to feel, the hammer of the machine guns, the shriek of the incoming, the shouting, the sudden ringing quiet after a blast that leaves you deaf and stunned in the middle of it all. Your body floods with something that makes your hands shake, and your thoughts race and your hearing narrow to a tunnel. And you must act anyway, must move and aim and think through a storm of sound built by nature and by man to freeze a creature in place. Some men lock up. It is not cowardice. It is what a body does when it is overwhelmed. And out here, the ones who freeze even for a second are the ones the jungle is most likely to keep. Now step back and see the whole picture, the way you would see a food web drawn out on a page. At the center of it is you, the young man from that small town, dropped into a place that was actively hostile to your body, before a single human enemy ever laid eyes on you. Above you, the heat and the rain. Around you, the terrain that blinds you and reveals you. Hidden in the green, the enemy who was born to this ground. Under your feet, the traps. And moving through all of it, unseen, the parasites and the rot and the fever. Every layer of this ecosystem has a way to kill you, and they do not take turns. They all work on you at once, every hour of every day, for the length of your entire tour. And that tour has a number on it, and the number is its own kind of torture. 365 days, 1 year to the day. You do not fight until the war is won, because no one can tell you when that will be. You fight until your calendar runs out. Every man out here knows his number, the exact count of days until he can go home, and he watches it fall like a man watching sand run through a glass. In the first months, you are too green to know what will kill you. In the last months, you know far too much, and the knowing eats you alive because now you understand exactly how close each day comes to being your last. And you have almost made it, and the jungle does not care how close you are. They have a name for the man in his final days, the short timer, and they watch him with a mix of hope and dread, because everyone has seen it happen. The man with a week left who steps on the wrong patch of ground. The man with 3 days left who catches the round, meant for no one in particular. Nature does not reward you for how far you have come. The antelope that has survived 100 crossings is no safer at the river's edge than the one crossing for the first time. The water does not remember. The jungle does not remember. Your number falls and the danger does not fall with it. And that gap between how close you are and how exposed you remain is where men lose their minds. Because the deepest wound this place gives you is not one you can see. It is the fear that never switches off. Out on the savannah, when the lions have eaten, the herd goes back to grazing. The danger passes and the body is allowed to rest. You are never allowed to rest. There is no season when the ambush cannot come. There is no hour when the trail is truly safe. Even in sleep, half of your mind stays on watch, listening, and after weeks of that, your body forgets how to fully stand down. Your hands shake, your temper frays. You flinch at a snapping branch. This is what it does to a creature to live inside constant threat with no end in sight, and no living thing, no matter how strong, is built to carry it without cost. And you carry something heavier than fear, something the survivors will carry for the rest of their lives. You watch friends die, not strangers. The men you ate beside, the men who showed you photos of their families, the men who covered you and trusted you to cover them. You watch it happen close enough to touch, and then you are expected to keep moving, keep watching the trail, keep functioning, because the war does not stop to let you grieve. In the wild, most animals do not seem to carry their dead. They move on because they must. You are asked to do the same, and you find that you cannot, not really, and you tuck it away and keep walking, and it waits for you. It will still be waiting when you are an old man, long after the last shot of this war has been fired. And the hardest part of all may be the letters. They reach you out here, folded and stained, carrying news of a world that has kept turning without you. A girl back home, a ball game, a car, a whole life going on in the ordinary sunlight while you sit in a hole in the dark on the far side of the earth. You read them by what little light you can find, and for a moment you are there, home whole. And then the moment ends and the jungle is still all around you. And the distance between those two worlds is so vast that you begin to wonder whether you will ever truly be able to cross back over it, even if your body makes it home. Many men carried that particular wound the longest of all, the sense that they had gone somewhere the people they loved could never follow and could never understand. So let us finally answer the question we began with. Why wouldn't you survive here? Not because you are weak, not because you lack courage. You would not survive because this entire world is arranged against a single young man who does not belong to it. The heat is against you. The rain is against you. The trees hide your death. The ground holds your death. The air itself carries your death on the wings of an insect too small to swat. Your enemy has spent a lifetime learning this ground while you have spent 6 days on it. And the clock you are counting down does nothing to lower the odds. It only tells you, day by falling day, how much longer you have to keep beating them. And yet, here is the part that should stay with you longest. Men did survive, not because the odds spared them, but because they endured what should not be endurable. They carried the weight up the hills. They crossed the water with the leeches. They shook with the fever and got back up. They watched their friends fall and kept the man behind them alive. They were, most of them, teenagers, boys who were too young to buy a drink in the country that sent them. And they were asked to face all of this at once, every day, for a year. When you look at what this ecosystem threw at them, the wonder is not that so many were lost. The wonder is that any of them walked back out of that green wall at all. That is why these stories matter, and that is why we tell them here. The men who lived this are growing old now, and their number, like the one they counted in the jungle, is falling. Every one of them carried a war inside them long after they came home, a war most of us will never have to imagine. The least we can do is remember what they walked through. So if this took you somewhere you have never been, and made you feel even a fraction of the weight those young men carried, then do one thing before you go. Subscribe so the next story finds you, and share this with someone who still remembers. Because a story that is remembered is a life that is honored, and these are lives that deserve to be honored for as long as there is anyone left to listen. You step off that trail at the end of the day. Your boots are ruined, your skin is raw, your hands will not stop shaking, and somewhere in the tree line the silence has already begun to watch you again for tomorrow. You made it through one more day in the deadliest ecosystem a young man was ever sent to survive. Your number falls by 1, 358 to go. And out here on this ground in this heat under those trees, That is as close to a victory as anyone gets. The ramp is still up. You cannot see the beach yet, but you can hear it. Over the growl of the engine and the slap of the waves comes a sound like nothing in your life before. A wall of noise built out of machine guns and shell fire and men screaming into it. Around you 30 other young men stand packed shoulder to shoulder, soaked, sick, gripping their rifles, staring at that steel ramp and knowing that in a few seconds it is going to drop. When it does, whatever is waiting on the other side will be waiting for you first. You are 19 years old. You have never seen a dead man. In 90 seconds, you will have seen more than you can ever count. Welcome to the deadliest morning of the 20th century and to a stretch of coast built, from the water to the bluffs, to kill you before your boots ever touch dry land. In the natural world, every creature is born into a set of rules that fit the place it lives. But you were not made for this shoreline. You grew up on a farm in Iowa, or a street in Brooklyn, or a town so small nobody outside your county has heard its name. You worked, you had a family, you had plans. Then the whole world caught fire, and now you are floating off the coast of France in a flat steel box, about to become the most exposed creature on the most dangerous beach on Earth. Out here you are the specimen, and this morning, the odds are worse than they have ever been for anyone. Over the next hour, we are going to walk through this world the way a naturalist walks through a hunting ground. We will study the cold grey water that wants to drown you before you fire a shot. We will study the open sand with no cover for a quarter mile. We will study the weapons waiting in the concrete above you, machines built by careful hands for the single purpose of cutting down men in the open. And we will follow you past the beach, if you make it past the beach, into the hedgerows and the forests and the frozen woods beyond, where the war keeps finding fresh ways to end you. By the end, you will understand why you would not survive. But first, do one small thing. Tap that subscribe button, because the men who lived through this are nearly gone now, and keeping the memory of what they walked into is the whole reason we are here. Your ordeal begins long before the ramp drops, out on the black water in the dark hours before dawn. The sea in the channel is rough and cold, and you are crowded into a small landing craft that pitches and rolls with every swell. Within minutes, nearly every man aboard is violently seasick, heaving over the side or into his own helmet, and there is nowhere to go and nothing to do but ride it out. You are cold, you are soaked with spray, you have been awake all night, and you are being carried steadily toward the most frightening thing you will ever face, while your own body empties itself out. This is how you arrive at the fight, before a single enemy has even seen you, weak, shaking, hollowed out, and afraid. Now the ramp drops, and in that instant, the water in front of you is torn to white foam, because the enemy gunners have been waiting for exactly this, for the ramp to fall and the men to be funneled out into the open. The first men off are the most exposed, and many never make it a single step. Those who do plunge into water that is often over their heads, weighed down by 60 pounds of gear that drags them straight down. A man who cannot get free of his pack in that cold water simply sinks and does not come back up. You have not yet reached the sand, you have not yet fired a shot, and the sea itself is already pulling men under all around you. Say you get free of the water. Now you face the beach, and the beach is a killing ground with no mercy in it. Between you and any cover lies a wide, flat, open stretch of sand, and every foot of it is watched by guns set high in concrete above you. There is nowhere to hide. There is no tree, no wall, no fold in the ground for a quarter mile. In the animal world, prey caught in the open with no cover is prey that dies. And the hunters here have arranged this beach so that you are always in the open, always in view, always in the fire. Your only choice is to run across it, through the noise and the falling men, and hope. Hope is not a plan. Out here, hope is all you have. And the weapon waiting for you as you cross that sand deserves a study all its own, because it changed what it meant to charge across open ground. The German machine gun fires so fast that it does not sound like separate shots at all. It sounds like a single tearing rip, like canvas torn or an engine revving, and the men who faced it gave it a nickname for the way it cut men down in rows. One gunner, well placed, with a clear field of fire across open sand, can do the work of an entire company. It does not aim at a man. It sweeps, side to side, a scythe of lead at waist height, and the men caught in that sweep fall together. To cross that beach is to run through the path of that scythe and gamble, with every step, that it is pointed somewhere else in the half-second you are exposed. If you live long enough to reach the low seawall at the top of the sand, you press yourself against it, and you are for a moment out of the direct fire. But you cannot stay. The whole point of the wall is that the enemy has already zeroed his mortars on it, knowing that is exactly where frightened men will bunch up. So the shells begin to fall on the very spot that felt like shelter, and once again you must move, up and off the beach, through the gaps blown in the wire, past the mines up toward the guns themselves. There is no safe place on this shore. Every spot that looks like cover is a spot the enemy has already marked, because he chose this ground and prepared it long before you arrived. Suppose you survive the beach. Suppose you climb the bluffs and the guns above you fall silent, and the sun comes up on a shoreline you will never forget as long as you live. You have survived the landing, and now you learn the cruelest truth of this war. The landing was only the door. The house behind it is enormous, and every room in it is trying to kill you too, because ahead lies the French countryside, and the countryside has been turned into a fortress of its own. One hedge, one field, one village at a time. But first, a word about how you got here, because in this war, you very likely arrived alone. This army runs on a system of replacements, which means that when a unit loses men, new men are fed in one at a time to fill the gaps. So you may reach the front as a stranger, handed to a squad of veterans who have already been through more than you can imagine. Men who are tired and hard and who look at you the way you might look at a tool you are not sure will hold. They will not learn your name right away. They have watched too many replacements arrive and disappear within days to spend their hearts on one more. You are green. You do not know the little tricks that keep a man alive, and until you prove you can learn them fast, you are a danger to yourself and to everyone near you. And the learning must happen fast, because the ground you are now fighting in was built by centuries of farmers into the most perfect ambush country imaginable. They call it the bocage. For 1,000 years the farmers here bounded their little fields with hedgerows, thick walls of earth and root and tangled brush, often taller than a man and just as wide. Each small field is a box walled in green on every side, with only a narrow gap or a sunken lane connecting one to the next. To your eyes, it looks like peaceful farmland. To the enemy defending it, it is a ready-made fortress with 1,000 rooms, and he has had time to prepare every one of them. Here is how the bocage kills you. You push through a gap into a new field, and the far hedge, 100 feet away, erupts. A machine gun set into the base of that hedge has been waiting, its field of fire laid perfectly across the only open ground. Snipers wait in the corners. Mortar crews behind the hedge drop shells on the gap you just came through, sealing the men behind you off from the men ahead. And when you finally take that field, at a terrible cost you look up and see the next hedge and the next field and the one after that, stretching on for miles. You do not fight one battle here. You fight the same deadly battle over and over, field by field, hedge by hedge, paying in blood for every small green box, with 100 more waiting. And death in this country often comes from a gun you never see and never hear until it is too late. The enemy's great dual-purpose cannon can kill a tank at a mile, and a man at any range its crew can see, and its shell travels faster than its own sound. The first sign that it has found you is the explosion. There is no incoming whistle to warn you, no time to drop and take cover. One moment the man beside you is walking, and the next he is gone. And only after does the flat crack of the distant gun reach your ears. To live under that weapon is to know that death can arrive with no warning at all, from a crew you will never lay eyes on, and there is nothing your courage can do about it. The ground beneath your feet is no safer than the air above it, because the enemy has seeded these fields and lanes and beaches with mines by the thousand. Some are built to kill a tank. Many are built to kill you. There is one in particular, a small, cruel device that springs up out of the ground waist-high when you trigger it and then explodes, spraying steel in every direction at the height of a man's body. The men who faced it gave it a grim nickname for the way it leaps up before it kills. You cannot see it. It sits an inch under the soil, patient, and it does not care whether a week has passed or a year. In nature, the buried trap is one of the oldest hunting tools there is, and here it has been perfected and scattered across every place a soldier might walk. And then there are the tanks, the great armored predators of this war, and here again, the odds are stacked against you. The enemy's heaviest tanks are monsters, thickly armored and armed with that same terrible gun, and a single one of them sitting in a hedgerow or a village street can hold up an entire advance. Your own tanks are faster, and there are far more of them, but their armor is thinner, and the men who crewed them knew it. They gave their own machines a bitter nickname after a cigarette lighter, for how readily they caught fire when hit. To ride into battle knowing your vehicle will burn if the enemy's shell finds it, and knowing his gun outranges yours, is to understand that in this war even steel and horsepower do not make you safe. There are quieter hunters too, patient and precise. The sniper waits in a church tower, a barn window, the upper branches of a tree, watching the lanes and the gaps for a careless moment. He is not trying to win a battle. He is trying to take one man, and then another, and to make every open doorway and every crossroads a place where death might be watching. A single good sniper can freeze a whole company in place, can make grown men afraid to move a muscle, can turn an ordinary village street into a gauntlet nobody wants to cross. Like the ambush hunter of the wild, he trades in patience and stillness, and he asks only that you show yourself for one careless second. Push inland far enough, and the war leads you into the forests, and the forests bring a horror all their own. Under the dense trees, the enemy has learned to set his artillery shells to burst in the branches overhead rather than on the ground. On open ground, you can throw yourself flat and let the blast pass over you. But a shell that explodes in the treetops rains its steel and its splintered wood straight down onto the men below, and there is no lying flat to escape it. The safest thing, the strange and terrible instinct that the forest teaches, is to hug a tree trunk and stand, because the ground is no shelter when death comes down from above. Cold, soaked, in a dark, wet wood where every barrage falls on your head. Men were ground down for weeks in a place that gave them nothing. And if the war lasts into winter, the winter itself becomes a predator, as deadly as any gun. In the frozen woods, in the deep cold, you dig a hole in the ground and you live in it. And there is no fire, because a fire at night is a target. The temperature falls far below freezing. Your breath freezes on your collar. The wounded, if they cannot be reached, freeze where they fall. And the cold works on you the way it works on any creature caught out in it, killing you slowly from the edges in. Your feet, trapped in wet boots in the snow, swell and blacken with frostbite and trench foot, and men lost toes and feet to the cold without ever being touched by a bullet. The wild has always used winter to thin the weak and the exposed. Out here, you are both. Picture one of those winter nights. You are in a hole in the frozen earth, in a forest in the dark. You cannot feel your feet. You have not been warm in weeks. You cannot light a fire, cannot move around to warm yourself, cannot make a sound. And somewhere out in the black trees the enemy may be massing for an attack, so you must stay awake, staring into a darkness that gives you nothing, hour after hour, shaking with cold and fear together. There is no season out here when the danger rests, no safe night, no warm bed waiting at the end of the week. There is only the next hour to survive, and then the one after that. Now think about what your body is enduring through all of it. You are marching for miles under a heavy load, digging in every night, going without real sleep for days, eating cold rations from a can when you can eat at all, soaked and frozen, and never once fully at rest. A body can run on fear and adrenaline for a while, but not forever. Men wore down to skin and bone and hollow eyes. Moving like old men, though most were barely out of their teens, the exhaustion becomes a weight of its own, dulling your thoughts and slowing your hands at the exact moments when quick thinking and quick hands are all that stand between you and the end. A worn-out animal is an easy kill. This war works hard to wear you out, and when you are hit, and out here it is a question of when, far more than if. Being wounded is only the start of a new ordeal. The medic comes to you through the same fire that put you down, and he does what he can with his hands and his small kit, and then you must be carried back out of the fight to an aid station, and from there farther back still to a hospital. Every stretch of that journey is its own danger. The lanes are shelled, the fields are mined. A man badly hit far from help may not make that journey in time. And the aid stations themselves, close behind the fighting, are grim, crowded, desperate places where tired surgeons work without rest on a river of broken young men that never stops flowing in. Not every man came to this fight across the water. Some fell into it from the sky, in the black hours before the landings, jumping from aircraft into flak and darkness over enemy country. And for them, the ordeal was loneliness piled on top of everything else. Scattered by wind and confusion, many came down miles from where they were meant to, alone or in small lost knots of men, deep behind enemy lines, with no idea where they were or where their unit had gone. A creature cut off from its herd in hostile country is a creature in mortal danger. And these men landed already separated, already lost, already surrounded, and had to fight their way back to their own kind through a countryside crawling with an enemy who knew exactly where he stood. Imagine coming down in the dark into a strange field, cutting yourself free of your chute, and having no idea whether the men moving in the next hedge are your own or the enemy. Every shape is a question. Every sound might be a friend or a killer. You cannot call out because your voice might bring the wrong men running. So you move through the night by feel and by luck, gathering other lost men one at a time, building a small band of the scattered, and together you try to do the job you were sent to do while the whole country wakes up around you and comes hunting. Few things a soldier faces are lonelier than that, dropped alone into the dark on the enemy's ground, hunted from the first minute your boots touch the earth. Push into the towns, and the war changes shape again into something slow and close and merciless. Fighting through a village or a city means clearing it one building at a time, one room at a time, never knowing what waits on the far side of a door or at the top of a stair. The enemy holds the upper floors and the cellars, fires down from windows, waits in the rubble. A single defended house can cost a squad dearly to take. And every doorway you step through, every corner you round, every window you pass, might be the last thing you ever do. There is no open ground to read here, no field of fire to study. There is only the next room and the awful question of what is inside it. And the towns are laced with traps as surely as the fields. A tempting souvenir left on a table, a door that opens too easily, a body that should not be disturbed. Any of them might be wired to explode the moment a tired, curious young man reaches out. The enemy knows what draws a soldier's eye and a soldier's hand, and he turns it against you. So you learn to trust nothing, to touch nothing, to move through these broken houses as though everything in them is a snare, because much of it is. The strain of that, hour after hour, wears a man down as surely as any battle, the endless need to suspect every ordinary object of hiding your death. We should study the enemy himself, because he is the apex predator of this world, and he is very good at what he does. By the summer you meet him, many of his soldiers are hardened veterans who have been fighting for years, some across the brutal battlefields of the East, men who have already survived things that killed most of the friends they started with. He is disciplined, he is skilled with his weapons, he digs in cleverly, chooses his ground with a craftsman's eye, and counterattacks the moment you take a position, before you have had time to make it your own. He does not panic, he does not break easily. And he is fighting now on the defensive, which suits a smaller, worn force far better than open attack ever could. And he fights on, even when the wider war has clearly turned against him, which makes him more dangerous, not less. A cornered animal is the most dangerous animal there is, and by the last months this enemy is cornered, defending ground foot by foot, making you pay dearly for every field and every street and every ruin, long after the outcome of the whole war has stopped being in doubt. You cannot count on him to give up. You cannot count on him to run. You must dig him out of every hole he chooses, and he chooses well, and he holds his fire until you are close. The fact that his side is losing does nothing to lower the price he charges you for each step forward, and some of those holes must be taken the hardest way there is. A concrete bunker set into a hillside, its guns sweeping the only ground you can cross, cannot be wished away or gone around. Someone has to cross that open ground under fire, get close enough to the firing slit to do something about it, and finish it at arm's length. It is among the most dangerous jobs this war offers, and the men who did it knew the odds as they rose to run. To attack a fixed gun in its concrete is to accept that you will be the most exposed creature on the field for the length of that run, with everything the enemy has pointed at the very ground you must cross. The land itself keeps setting obstacles across your path, and few are worse than a river. To cross one under fire, you must leave the cover of the bank and put yourself out on open water in a small boat. or on a fragile span, in full view, moving slowly, while the enemy on the far side pours everything he has into that narrow strip. A crossing against a defended bank is one of the deadliest things an army can attempt, because for those long minutes on the water, there is no cover at all, nowhere to go, nothing to do but keep moving toward the far shore and pray you reach it. Many did not. The water carried them away as surely as the sea had tried to on the first morning. But the sound that comes to define this war, the one the survivors would hear in their sleep for the rest of their lives, is the artillery. It is the great killer here, the cause of more wounds than any other weapon, and it can find you almost anywhere. You can be dug in, hidden, doing everything right, and still the shells come hour after hour, the ground heaving, the air thick with steel and thunder, and there is nothing to shoot back at, nothing to do but press yourself into the earth and endure and hope. To live under sustained shell fire is to have your nerve tested far past any reasonable limit, and it broke more men in the end than the beach or the hedges or the cold ever did. And you learn to dread the small, slow aircraft that circles high above the battlefield, because it is not there to fight you directly. It is there to see you. From up there, a spotter can look down on your positions, your movements, your gatherings, and call those big guns down onto anything he finds. Under its eye you cannot mass, cannot move in the open, cannot rest in a spot it has marked, because minutes later the shells arrive. It turns the whole sky into a threat and teaches you to hate open ground in daylight, to keep to cover, to move in small groups, because up there something is always watching, and what it sees, the guns will punish. And death here does not always wear the enemy's uniform. In the confusion of a fast-moving fight, with everyone moving and no one certain, your own artillery can fall short, your own aircraft can mistake your position for the enemy's, and men have died under fire from their own side, killed by the very weapons meant to shield them. It is one of the ugliest truths of this kind of war, that in the smoke and noise and chaos, the line between friend and foe can blur even for the men behind the guns, and that a wrong number on a map or a moment's confusion in the sky can bring your own thunder down upon your own head. And through so much of it, there is the mud and the rain. Autumn and winter turn the roads and fields to a deep clinging muck that swallows boots and bogs down vehicles, and makes every movement a labor. You live wet, you sleep wet, you fight wet, for weeks on end. The supplies that keep you fed and armed must be hauled forward through that same mud over long exposed roads, and when the weather closes in or the roads give out, the food thins and the ammunition runs low at the worst possible time. An army is a living thing that must be fed, and when its supply falters, the men at the front feel it first, going hungry and short of rounds in the one place they can least afford to. There is a thing about this world that no one warns you of, and it is the presence of the dead. In a hard-fought sector they are everywhere, friend and enemy alike, in the fields and the ditches and the ruined houses, more than can be quickly buried. And in the warm months the smell of it hangs over the whole landscape, and works its way into your clothes and your food and your memory. You learn to live alongside it because you have no choice, and that too is a wound, the slow deadening of a young man who was raised to be horrified by death and is now surrounded by it every waking hour. Something in you goes quiet and hard in order to bear it, and that quiet, hard thing does not easily soften again. And no one can tell you how you will act the first time the fire is truly meant for you, because you do not know until it happens. Some men freeze. The noise, the fear, the sight of the man beside them falling, all of it locks them in place, unable to move or think or fire. It is not cowardice, whatever anyone later says. It is what a body does when it is pushed past its limit, the same way a rabbit locks up in the open when the hawk stoops. But out here the freeze can be fatal, in that first fight and in every one after, and learning to move and act through that wall of fear, if you live long enough to learn it, is the hardest lesson this war has to teach. And there is the particular dread of being taken, or of the moment when no quarter is given. In the chaos and rage of close fighting, in the heat of an assault, mercy is promised by no one, and men worn to the edge of their endurance do terrible things and have terrible things done to them. To be wounded and helpless as the enemy overruns your position, to be captured in the confusion, to be at the mercy of frightened, furious men in the worst moment of a battle, is a fear that rides alongside every other. You are not only trying to survive the weapons, You are trying to survive the loss of all the rules, in a place where the rules have already been stretched past breaking, and you dig. You dig every single time you stop, because a hole in the ground is the only real protection you have, and the enemy's guns make certain you will need it. Tired as you are, cold as you are, hungry as you are, the moment you halt, you take out your small shovel and you dig into hard ground, into frozen ground, into mud, because the man who does not dig is the man the next barrage finds. It is endless, exhausting, thankless labor, and it never stops. One more thing grinding you down between the fights, the price of the small hole that might, if your luck holds, carry you through the night. Step back and look at the sheer arithmetic of it, because the numbers are a horror of their own. A rifle company sent into this fighting could be worn down to a fraction of its strength in a matter of weeks. Its ranks refilled with replacements, worn down again, refilled again, so that the same unit on paper might pass its own number of men through the meat of a campaign several times over. For the man in a rifle platoon, the odds of coming through the whole thing untouched, from the beach to the end, were slim. And everyone in the line came to feel that in their bones. You were not one man facing one battle. You were one more figure fed into a machine that consumed men faster than almost anything before it in history. And you come to understand something bleak about lasting in the line. The longer you survive, the more of the men around you have watched disappear, until you look up one day and find you are among the few left from the group you started with, that the faces have nearly all changed, that you have become the tired veteran the new replacements now watch with worry in their eyes. Survival brings no comfort, only more loss to carry and a growing certainty that your own turn is only a question of time. The math does not care how long you have already lasted. Every day in the line is a fresh roll of the dice, and the dice keep no memory of yesterday's luck. And strangely, this world is not one long battle, but a jagged rhythm of waiting and terror. Long stretches of cold, wet, exhausting nothing, of digging and marching and staring at the same tree line, broken without warning by a few minutes of pure chaos in which everything is decided. You cannot relax during the waiting, because the terror can begin in any second, and you cannot rest during the terror, because it demands everything you have. So you live suspended between the two, never fully calm and never fully braced, and that suspension, held for weeks and months on end, wears at a man in a way that neither pure rest nor pure action ever could. The waiting is a weapon of its own, and the enemy uses it well. At night, someone must go out beyond the line, and it may be you. The listening post and the night patrol send small groups of men crawling into the black ground between the armies to watch, to warn, to catch the enemy massing before he strikes. Out there, alone in the dark, a few hundred yards from your own lines and much closer to theirs, every nerve is drawn to breaking. A cough, a snapped twig, the wrong sound at the wrong moment, and the enemy's guns find you with no cover and no help close enough to matter. You lie in the cold and the wet and the dark, straining every sense, knowing that you are the tripwire, that your task is to be found by whatever is coming, so the men behind you will have their warning. Few things ask more of a young man's nerve than that. There was one advantage your side held that the enemy could not match, and it was the sky. On a clear day, your aircraft ruled overhead, and that eye above and hammer from above was worth more than almost anything on the ground. But weather takes no orders. When the clouds rolled in low and the fog settled and the rain came down, the aircraft were grounded, and your great advantage simply vanished, and the enemy knew it. He learned to make his boldest moves under the cover of foul weather, when no help could come from above, when for a few days the ground belonged to whoever was toughest on it. To have your greatest strength taken away by nothing more than a bank of cloud is to learn how little any advantage is truly promised out here. And sometimes the fighting closes to a distance no young man is ever ready for, close enough to see a face, close enough to reach out and touch, in a trench, in a room, in the rubble. The fight can come down to grenades thrown around a corner, to a rifle swung like a club, to the raw, desperate struggle of men trying to kill one another with whatever is in their hands. Nothing in a young man's life before the war prepares him for that, for violence at arm's length against another human being who is just as frightened and just as desperate as he is. The men who lived through those moments rarely spoke of them afterward, because there are no clean words for what happens when the fighting gets that close. Step back and look at the whole of it, the way you would look at a food web drawn out on a page. At the center is you, the young man from that small town, dropped onto a shore and into a country built to end you. The sea tries to drown you. The open beach offers you to the guns. The hedges hide your death. The forests drop it on your head. The ground beneath you holds it buried and waiting. The enemy's cannon kills you from beyond sight. His snipers from the shadows, his tanks from behind armor your own guns can barely touch. And the cold and the hunger and the endless sleepless marching wear down whatever the weapons miss. Every layer of this world has a way to kill you, and none of them takes turns. They all work on you at once, every day, for as long as the war lasts. And the war does not run on a clock the way you might wish it did. There is no fixed number of days to count down, no set tour that sends you home when it ends. For the man in the line, the war very often ends only 3 ways. It ends when you are wounded badly enough to be carried out. It ends when you are killed. Or it ends when the whole war ends, which no one can promise you will happen before your luck runs out. To fight with no end date in sight, knowing the only sure ways out are a hospital bed or a grave, is a particular kind of weight, and it settled over these men and never fully lifted. Because the deepest wound this war gives you is one that leaves no mark on the skin. It is the endless shelling, the sound that never stops, the ground that shakes for hours until you cannot think, cannot rest, cannot hold yourself together. Men called it many things, but it came to the same thing in the end. A human mind can only take so much of that thunder, so much fear held for so long, before something inside gives way. Strong men, brave men, men who had done everything asked of them, reached a point where their bodies simply would not answer anymore, where they shook and wept and could not go on. It was not weakness. It was the plain limit of what a person can endure, and this war pushed past that limit in almost everyone who stayed in the line long enough. And you carry something heavier than fear, the same weight the survivors carried for the rest of their lives. You watch friends die, not strangers. The men you shared a hole with, the men who showed you the photo of a girl back home, the men who covered you and trusted you to cover them. You see it happen close enough to touch, and then you are told to keep moving, keep fighting, because the war does not pause to let you grieve. So you push it down and you go on, and it waits for you. It will still be there when you are an old man in a quiet house, long after the guns have gone silent, long after the world has moved on and forgotten what the world asked of you. So let us finally answer the question we began with. Why wouldn't you survive here? Not because you are weak, and not because you lack courage. You would not survive because everything in this world was built and arranged to take you. The sea, the open sand, the guns in the concrete, the hedges, the mines, the tanks, the snipers, the shells in the treetops, the deep winter cold. Your enemy prepared this ground for years while you crossed an ocean to reach it. And the war set no clock to count down, offered no safe season, promised no certain way home. Layer upon layer, the whole of it was aimed at the young man standing in the open, aimed at you, and yet, here is the part that should stay with you longest. Men did survive, not because the odds spared them, but because they endured what should not be endurable. They stepped off that ramp into the fire. They crossed the sand, they cleared the hedges, one bloody field at a time. They dug into the frozen ground and held when everything in them wanted to run. They watched their friends fall and kept the man beside them alive. Most of them were barely more than boys, too young to be trusted with half the things they were handed, and they were asked to face all of this at once and keep going. When you weigh what this world threw at them, the wonder is not how many were lost. The wonder is that any of them walked out of it at all. That is why these stories matter, and that is why we tell them here. The men who lived this are old now, and their number, like an army in a long campaign, grows smaller every year. Each one of them carried a war home inside him and lived with it quietly for decades in ways most of us will never have to imagine. The least we can do is remember what they walked into on our behalf. So if this took you somewhere you have never been, and let you feel even a fraction of the weight those young men carried, then do one thing before you go. Subscribe so the next story finds you, and share this with someone who still remembers. A story that is remembered is a life that is honored, And these are lives that deserve to be honored for as long as there is anyone left to listen. The guns fall quiet at last, and you are still here. Your uniform is filthy, your hands will not stop shaking, and you have seen things this morning that you will carry to the end of your days. You crossed the deadliest beach in the world and lived. The men who did not make it lie behind you on the sand, and the country ahead is still full of hedges and forests and frozen woods that mean to finish what the beach began. But you are alive, right now, this hour, standing on ground that a few thousand yards ago belonged entirely to death. And out here on this shore on this morning, that is as close to a victory as anyone gets. It is long past midnight, and the temperature has fallen to 30 degrees below zero. You are lying in a shallow hole scraped into frozen ground on a bare Korean hillside, and you have not been warm in longer than you can remember. Your feet are somewhere past feeling. Your rifle is so cold that the metal burns your bare skin. And then, out in the black beyond your position, a sound drifts up the mountain that will haunt the men who hear it for the rest of their lives. A bugle, then a whistle, then another and another from every direction at once. And then the hillside itself seems to move because it is covered with men, more than you can count. Coming toward you out of the dark and the snow, you are surrounded. You are outnumbered many times over, and the coldest, longest night of your life has only just begun. Welcome to the frozen mountains of Korea in the terrible winter of 1950, to a place and a season that together made one of the deadliest environments American soldiers have ever been asked to survive. In the natural world, every creature is shaped by the climate it is born into. The Arctic fox grows a thick white coat. The bear sleeps the hard months away. But you were not made for this cold, and you were not made for these mountains. You are a young man from somewhere warm and ordinary, carried now to a high frozen plateau on the far side of the world. And here the enemy is not only the army surrounding you, here the enemy is the cold itself. And the cold does not sleep, does not tire, and does not ever stop hunting. Out here you are the specimen, and this winter, everything is trying to kill you at once. Over the next hour, we are going to study this world the way a naturalist studies the harshest corner of the earth. We will study the cold that freezes the weapon in your hands and the blood in the wounded. We will study the mountains and the single narrow road that is your only way out. We will study the enemy who comes in the night in numbers beyond counting and who endures this same cold on even less than you have. And we will follow you on the long fighting march to the sea, carrying your wounded and your dead, through a gauntlet that should have swallowed every man who tried it. By the end, you will understand why you would not survive. But first, do one small thing. Tap subscribe, because the men who lived this are nearly gone now, and keeping the memory of what they endured is the whole reason we are here. Let us begin with the cold, because the cold is the true apex predator of this place, and it kills more quietly and more patiently than any rifle. The temperature here falls to 30 and 40 degrees below zero, and a wind comes off the mountains that drives it deeper still. At that cold, the human body is in a fight for its life every single second, whether or not a shot is ever fired. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. The body pulls its warmth inward to protect the heart and the core, and it abandons the hands and the feet and the face to do it, which is why those are the first to go. In the wild, the cold is nature's oldest way of thinning out the weak and the exposed. Here you are both, and the cold has you in its sights from the moment you arrive, and the frostbite comes for nearly everyone. Your feet, in boots, never truly built for this, lose their feeling first, and if you cannot warm them, the flesh begins to freeze. Men pulled off their boots and found their toes had gone waxy and white and hard, and knew that when the thaw came, if it came, those toes might blacken and be lost. Fingers stiffened until they could barely work a trigger. Faces burned and then went numb. The cold did not need the enemy's help to fill the aid stations. It took men out of the fight by the hundred, one frozen limb at a time. And a soldier who cannot walk or grip his weapon in a place like this is a soldier the mountain has already claimed. And the cold set a deadly trap that caught the careless and the hard-working alike. When you labored, climbing a ridge, digging, marching under your load, your body sweated even in that terrible cold. And then, when you stopped, That sweat froze against your skin and inside your clothing, and the very heat your effort had produced turned into a layer of ice that pulled the warmth out of you faster than before. So you learned a hard, strange discipline to work without sweating if you could, to manage your own heat as though your life depended on it, because it did. The men who did not learn it, who soaked themselves with effort and then went still, found the cold waiting to punish them, and the cold's punishment was frostbite, and worse. And the ground itself refused to help you. Frozen hard as stone to a depth well past a shovel's reach, it would not be dug. The deep hole that might have sheltered you from fire and wind could not be scraped out of earth that turned the edge of an entrenching tool. Men chipped and hacked at it, and won only shallow scrapes or piled rocks and frozen dirt into low walls instead, and lay behind whatever thin cover they could make, while the enemy fired down from above, and the wind cut across the open ridgeline. In most fighting, the hole in the ground is a soldier's best friend. Here, the ground was frozen shut, and it would not take you in. And what you wore was never quite enough. The winter came on hard and early and caught men in gear that had not been meant for cold like this, layers that were fine against an ordinary winter and hopeless against 40 below. You wore everything you had and you were still cold. Your breath froze on your collar and in your eyebrows and along the edge of your hood. Your canteen, worn against your body, still froze. There was no getting warm. Not really. Not ever. Only degrees of cold, from bad to killing. And you spent every hour of every day and every endless night somewhere on that scale, fighting a battle against the temperature that never once let up. And sleep, the thing your worn body begged for, became one more danger, because in that cold, a man who fell deeply asleep might not wake. The warmth ebbed out of a still body, and the cold crept in, and exhaustion could slide into something from which there was no returning. So even rest had teeth here. Men fought to stay awake through nights that offered no comfort, shook one another, kept each other moving and talking, because to drift off unguarded in 30 below was to risk never opening your eyes again. In the wild, the cold takes the sleeping and the still. On that plateau, the same ancient law held, and the men knew it, and fought their own bodies' need for rest as fiercely as they fought the enemy. Even the machines struggled to live in that cold. Engines had to be kept running or started every so often through the night, because an engine left to sit in 40 below could freeze solid and refuse to turn over, and a truck that would not start was a truck that had to be abandoned, along with whatever and whoever it was meant to carry. Batteries died, fuel thickened. The vehicles carrying the wounded and the guns and the supplies down that road were themselves fighting the temperature the whole way, and everyone that froze and had to be left behind was a small disaster for the men depending on it. In that cold, nothing was reliable. Not your weapon, not your body, not even the engines meant to carry you home. Now understand what the cold does to everything you depend on to stay alive, because it turns your own equipment against you. The oil in your rifle thickens and freezes, and a frozen weapon will not fire, so men learn to keep their guns dry and bare, and even to warm the working parts with their own bodies, because a jammed rifle in a night attack is a death sentence. Rations froze solid in the can, hard as stone, impossible to eat without thawing against your skin first. Water in your canteen turned to ice. The heavy weapons suffered too, their mechanisms sluggish, their base plates cracking against the iron-hard frozen ground. In this cold, the tools that were supposed to keep you alive kept failing you at the worst possible moments, and you had to fight the cold and the enemy and your own frozen gear all at the same time. The cruelest trick of all the cold played. It played on the wounded. A man hit in that temperature faced a second enemy the moment he went down, because the cold began to kill him even as he bled. The life-saving plasma that might have replaced his lost blood froze in its bottles and could not be given. The morphine meant to ease his pain froze in its little tubes, so the medics carried the syrettes in their mouths, against their own skin, to keep them thawed enough to use. Sweat inside a man's clothing turned to ice against him. A wound that would have been survivable in a warmer place could turn fatal here, simply because the cold finished what the bullet started. To be wounded at Chosin was to face death twice over, from the injury and from the freezing air. And the freezing air showed no mercy at all. Now let us look at the ground itself, because the mountains and the road were as much a trap as the cold. This was high broken country, a maze of steep ridges and frozen valleys, and threading through it all was a single narrow road, little more than a track cut into the mountainsides, and that road was the only way in and the only way out for thousands of men and all their vehicles and guns. Hold the road and you might live. Lose the road and you were finished. And the enemy understood this as well as you did, and so he took to the high ground above it, the ridges and the passes that looked down on every mile of that lifeline, and from up there he could rain fire down onto the road whenever he chose. This is the terrible geometry of the place. You were strung out along a thin line in the bottom of the valleys, and the enemy held the heights all around you, which in mountain war is the position everyone wants and few can take. To move down that road was to move through a shooting gallery, past ridge after ridge that had to be cleared and held, or the whole column would be cut apart. Every high pass was a door that could be slammed shut. Every curve in the road could hide a roadblock. In the animal world, the hunter who commands the high ground commands the kill, and here the enemy had the high ground almost everywhere, looking down on you from the frozen ridgelines, while you fought to keep the one narrow road open beneath him. In the days before the trap closed, there was a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. Small signs at first, prisoners who spoke of vast armies in the hills, movement glimpsed on the ridgelines, a quiet that felt too deep. The scale of what was gathering in the mountains was hard to believe, and by the time it was fully understood, it was already upon them. When the blow fell, it fell in the night and from every direction at once, far larger than anyone had feared, and men who had thought they were nearing the end of the war found themselves overnight surrounded and fighting for their lives. Few things shake a soldier like the ground shifting completely beneath him in a single night, and that is exactly what happened here. And now the full weight of your situation becomes clear, because you are surrounded, and you are outnumbered in a way that seems impossible. When the enemy entered this war, he came not in the thousands, but in numbers so vast that the men on the ground could scarcely believe it, a force several times the size of your own, pouring down out of the mountains and closing around your columns before anyone fully understood what was happening. You are cut off. The road behind you is blocked. The enemy is on every side, and above you there is no line to fall back to, no safe rear area, no way out that does not run straight through him. You are a small band of men on a frozen plateau, encircled by an army many times your size in the deadliest cold on earth. So let us study this enemy, the human predator who has trapped you here, because he is formidable in ways your side was slow to understand. He travels light, without the long tail of supply your army needs, carrying little more than his weapon, a small ration of grain, and the clothes on his back. He moves at night, on foot, through mountains your side thought impassable, and he appears where he is not expected, in the dark, in numbers. Having crossed ground, no one believed an army could cross. He endures this same murderous cold with far less than you have. No warm shelter, no hot food, often no proper cold weather gear at all. And still he keeps coming. A predator that needs almost nothing and can go almost anywhere is the hardest kind to fight, and this one had both traits in full. But his greatest weapon was the night, and he used it against you with terrible skill. When the sun went down and the cold deepened to its worst and your air support could no longer see, that was when he came. He came not with the roar of vehicles, but with the strange, chilling music of bugles and whistles and shepherds' horns echoing off the frozen ridges, signals passing orders through the dark. And to the men in the holes that sound became the sound of dread itself. Out of the blackness, the infantry came, on foot, in wave after wave, using their vast numbers to find the weak points in your line and pour through them. The night belonged to him, and every night he collected on that debt. And there was something about the sound of those attacks that worked on a man's mind long after the fighting stopped. The bugles and whistles and horns in the dark, echoing off the frozen ridges, meant to signal the enemy and to unnerve you, and they did both. To lie in a freezing hole and hear that strange music rise out of the black, and to know what always followed it, was to feel a dread that got into your bones deeper than the cold. Many men said afterward that they could still hear it years later in quiet moments, that sound drifting up the mountain in the dark, the sound that meant the waves were coming again. The enemy understood that fear was a weapon too, and he played it as skillfully as any gun. Picture what it is to defend your hole through one of those nights, You are dug into the frozen ground, a handful of men holding a stretch of ridge, and the enemy is coming at you in numbers that make your own seem like nothing. You fire until your weapon is almost too hot to hold in hands, too cold to feel it, and still they come. They fall, and more take their place, climbing over their own, pressing forward into your fire because sheer weight of numbers is the plan. The fighting closes to grenade range, to arm's length, to the raw struggle of men in the dark, and you cannot break, you cannot run, because there is nowhere to run to, and the men beside you are depending on you to hold your few feet of frozen dirt until the sun comes up. And in the dark, in the chaos of those attacks, you often could not tell where the enemy was and was not. He slipped between positions, got in among the vehicles and the holes, appeared behind lines that had seemed secure. The night became a swirling confusion of muzzle flashes and shouting and shapes moving through the snow, and you fired at movement and prayed you were not firing at your own. To hold a position when the enemy might already be behind you, when the neat line on a map had dissolved into a dozen separate, desperate fights in the dark, asks a kind of nerve that most people never have to find. The men found it, night after night, because the alternative was to be overrun. Keeping the automatic weapons firing through those nights took desperate measures, because a machine gun that froze at the wrong moment could doom a whole position. Men did whatever it took to keep the actions working, warming them, freeing them, coaxing them back to life with numbed hands, because when the waves came out of the dark, the volume of fire those guns put out was the difference between holding and being swept away. A single gun kept firing could break up an attack that would otherwise have reached the holes. A single gun frozen silent at the wrong second could open a door the enemy would pour through. So the men nursed those weapons like something precious, because in the night they were. And there were moments when a position was simply overwhelmed, when the numbers coming out of the dark were too many and the line broke, and men found themselves swept over, cut off in the chaos. Some in that moment survived only by stillness, by lying among the fallen and not moving as the enemy passed, waiting for a chance to slip back to their own lines. To lie motionless in the snow in that cold, playing dead while an army moves around you is a horror it is hard to put into words. And yet men did it and endured it, and some of them lived because of it. The plateau demanded strange and terrible things of the men caught on it, and doing them was the only way through. And some positions carried the fate of everyone on their shoulders. High on the road out sat a mountain pass that had to be held open, because if it fell, the only escape route closed, and thousands of men would be trapped for good. So a company of men was left up there, alone, on a frozen hilltop in the enemy's rear, told to hold that ground no matter what came. And for days and freezing nights they did, cut off, running low on everything. Attacked again and again by an enemy who understood exactly what that pass was worth. That they held it at all, in that cold, against those numbers, is one of the hardest things men have ever been asked to do. That so many of them froze and bled to do it is the price this place demanded for the road to stay open. Between the fighting, your body is quietly failing, worn down by cold and hunger and the total absence of rest. There is no warm tent to return to, no hot meal, no real sleep. The rations you carry are frozen bricks that must be thawed against your body before you can choke them down, and there are never enough of them. And a body, burning everything it has just to keep from freezing, needs far more food than it is getting. Men grew gaunt and slow and clumsy, their minds dulled by exhaustion and cold together. And a dull, slow, exhausted man makes the small mistakes that get him killed. The mountain and the winter were grinding you down between every fight, and there was no way to stop it and no place to recover. And strangely, in all that ice, you were dying of thirst. Water froze in the canteen, and to drink you had to melt snow, which took fire and time and fuel you rarely had, so men went short of water for days, their bodies drying out even while surrounded by frozen water in every direction. Eating snow to ease it only chilled you further from the inside and cost more warmth than a frozen body could spare. Dehydration crept in on top of the cold and the hunger and the exhaustion. One more way the mountain wore you down. One more of your body's basic needs that this place quietly refused to meet. To be parched in the middle of a frozen wilderness is one of the cruel jokes of that plateau, and it was no joke at all to the men living it. There is a small, strange detail from this battle that says everything about how thin the margin was. Among the few things that could be eaten without thawing, that stayed chewable even in that awful cold, was a certain small candy, and by chance a great many of them ended up in the hands of the men on that plateau. And so grown men, fighting for their lives in 30 below, kept themselves going on frozen candy pulled from a pocket, a tiny sweetness in the middle of a frozen hell. It is almost funny until you understand what it means, that the men were so far past the edge of what an army is supposed to provide that a pocketful of candy became a genuine lifeline. That is how far beyond the normal limits of war these men had been pushed. Now the decision comes that will define this whole ordeal. Surrounded, cut off, outnumbered, freezing, you cannot stay where you are, and you cannot simply flee, because there is no open road behind you to flee down. The only way home is forward and out, fighting down that single narrow road, ridge by ridge, roadblock by roadblock, all the way to the sea. This is not a retreat in the ordinary sense. It is an attack in a new direction, a fighting march through an enemy who holds the high ground the entire way, and every foot of it will have to be paid for. The men understood the truth of it plainly. To get out alive, they would have to fight their way through the very army that had surrounded them, in the worst cold any of them had ever known, and the enemy had prepared that road to be your grave. All along the route he set his roadblocks and his ambushes, chose the curves and the narrow places where a stalled column would bunch up, and waited on the heights above with his guns. To keep moving, your side had to send men up the icy ridges again and again to clear the high ground before the vehicles below could pass. Take a hill, hold it long enough for the column to move, then climb down and do it again at the next one, and the next, mile after frozen mile. The column crawled forward at the pace of the fighting, which was slow and cold, and paid in blood at every ridge, and the mountains gave nothing away for free. At one of those passes, the enemy played what should have been his winning card. He destroyed a bridge at a spot where the road clung to a sheer mountainside, a gap that the trucks and guns and all the vehicles carrying the wounded simply could not cross. Without that bridge, everything on wheels and everyone who could not walk out on their own would be lost. It seemed impossible. And then, in one of the most remarkable feats of the whole campaign, sections of a new bridge were dropped from the sky by parachute, hauled into place, and fitted across the gap by engineers working in that brutal cold. And the column rolled on. It was a small miracle wrung out of desperate men and careful planning, and without it, the road to the sea would have ended at a cliff. And through all of it, they carried their wounded and their dead. This is the thing that separates what happened here from a rout, and it is the thing that cost them most dearly. They would not leave their own behind. The wounded were loaded onto every vehicle, lashed to fenders and hoods when the trucks were full, and the dead, where they could be carried, were carried too. Every man who fell to bring out another was a further loss, and still they did it, because to leave a wounded man in that cold was to leave him to a certain and freezing death, and they would not do it. In the coldest, most desperate hour of the whole march, that refusal to abandon each other was the one warm thing on that entire frozen mountain. At the heart of the trapped force, in a village on the plateau, the men did something that should not have been possible. Under fire, in that cold, in that frozen ground, they carved out a rough airstrip because the growing crowd of wounded could not be carried out over the mountains in time to save them. And so aircraft came down onto that crude, icy strip in the middle of an encircled position and took the wounded off, load after load, flying them out over the enemy to safety and warmth and surgeons. It was a lifeline threaded straight through the middle of a siege, and it saved a great many men who would otherwise have had no chance at all. But for every man flown out, many more remained, because the aircraft could not take them all. The strip could only do so much. The weather closed it when it chose, and the fighting produced wounded faster than any number of flights could clear. So most of the injured stayed with the column and would have to come out the hard way, down the road, lashed to the trucks, enduring the cold and the jolting miles and the roadblocks along with everyone else. To be wounded and waiting, not knowing whether a plane or a truck or nothing at all would come for you, in that cold, was its own particular torment, and thousands lived it. And moving through all of it were the medics doing the impossible with frozen hands. They crawled to the wounded through the same fire and the same cold, worked to stop bleeding, that the temperature was trying to freeze and to save men the cold was trying to take, thawing their morphine in their own mouths, giving what comfort could be given in a place with almost none to give. They could not carry warmth with them, could not undo the cold, could only do their best against impossible odds and then help load the wounded for the long cold road out. That they saved anyone at all in those conditions is remarkable. That they kept trying through all of it is the kind of thing that ought never to be forgotten. When the column moved, it often moved at night, a long thin snake of freezing men and struggling vehicles winding down a mountain road in the dark. To march in that state, half frozen, bone-tired, hungry, was a trial all its own, men falling asleep on their feet as they walked, stumbling, kept going only by the man ahead and the man behind. The column could move only as fast as its slowest part and its next roadblock allowed, which meant long, agonizing halts in the killing cold, standing still in the open, while the warmth leached out of you, waiting for the fighting up ahead to clear the way. Stop and freeze, or move and fight. Those were the only two choices the road offered, over and over, all the way down. Some of the men had to come out across the frozen reservoir itself, out onto the ice of the great frozen lake that gave the battle its name, in the open, in the cold, with the enemy on the shores. To walk across a sheet of ice in the dark, exposed with nowhere to take cover, and the surface itself a danger, is a thing few soldiers are ever asked to do. But the road was not the only path that had to be taken, and men came out by whatever way they could find, over the ice, over the ridges, down the road, all of them converging on the long march to the sea, all of them fighting the same cold and the same enemy, and the same exhaustion the whole way. And someone had to be last. As the long column fought its way down toward the sea, someone had to hold the tail, to guard the rear against the enemy pressing in behind, to be the final men on that frozen road with the whole enemy army at their backs. It was among the most dangerous places to be in the entire march, the very end of the line, covering everyone ahead of you, knowing that if the rear guard broke, the enemy would be into the column's back. The men who held that place, cold and outnumbered, and closest of all to being cut off for good, carried the rest of the column on their shoulders in those final miles, and paid for it accordingly. And the column did not move alone. Alongside the soldiers and among them came the ordinary people of that country, refugees fleeing the fighting and the cold, whole families on the frozen roads with whatever they could carry, trying to get south ahead of the disaster, suffering the same terrible weather with even less to protect them. Their presence added confusion and heartbreak to an already desperate march, and it was a reminder that war in that winter fell on far more than the men in uniform. The cold and the fear and the frozen roads did not spare the old or the young or the innocent, and the sight of them on that road stayed with the soldiers long after. And through all of it, what held these men together was something the natural world has no word for: discipline and training, and a fierce loyalty to the men beside them, and small unit leaders who kept their heads when everything around them was chaos and cold and dread. When a force is surrounded and freezing and outnumbered, the ordinary thing is for it to come apart, to scatter, to break. That this one did not, that it held its shape and fought as units and came out the far side still an army, is a testament to the men who led the small groups and the men who followed them. It was not the cold that decided this, and not only the guns. It was whether men would hold together when every reason to fall apart was pressing in on them, and these men held. There was one force on your side that the enemy could not match, and it flew. Overhead, when the weather allowed, came the aircraft, diving on the ridgelines and the roadblocks, striking the massed enemy just ahead of the column, so close that the pilots and the men on the ground could nearly see one another. That fire from above broke up attacks that would otherwise have overwhelmed the men on the road, and again it was the thing that kept the column alive. But the weather did not always allow it. When the clouds came down and the snow closed in, the planes could not fly, and in those hours the men on the ground were on their own, and the enemy knew it and pressed hardest exactly when the sky was empty. Look at what all of this was doing to a young man's mind, because the wounds here were not only in the flesh. To be cold beyond any cold you had imagined, day and night, without pause, for weeks. To fight for your life in the dark against numbers that never seemed to end. to watch friends freeze or fall or be loaded frozen onto a truck, to never once feel safe or warm or rested in the entire time you were there. A mind can bear a great deal, but this was a great deal all at once and without relief, and it aged these young men in ways the years never explain. Many of them were boys, and they went up onto that plateau as boys and came off it as something older and harder and quieter that would never fully be young again. And you carry the memory of the friends you lose, the same weight the survivors carried the rest of their lives. Not strangers. The men who shared your frozen hole, who split the last of the frozen rations with you, who held the line beside you through the worst of the nights. You see them fall, and there is no time to grieve, because the column must keep moving and the cold does not wait, and so you push it down and you keep walking toward the sea. But it does not leave you. It waits, and it comes back in the quiet years afterward, in the warm, safe rooms of the rest of your life. The faces of the young men who did not come down off that mountain when you did. And the cold, remember, did not choose sides. The enemy who came at you in the night suffered under that same terrible sky, with even less to protect him, and in places whole groups of his soldiers were found frozen where they had waited, killed by the same winter that was killing you, having endured cold that beggars belief in order to reach you at all. There is a grim lesson in that, one the natural world teaches without mercy. In an environment this hostile, the climate is the true master of the field, and it collects from everyone. The men on both sides of that frozen plateau were, in the end, all prey to the same predator, the cold, and it took a fearful number of them regardless of the uniform they wore. And into that frozen world, when it could reach them, came the mail from home. Folded letters carrying news of warm kitchens and ordinary streets, and people going about their lives under a gentler sky, half a world away from that plateau. Men read them by what light they had, hands shaking with cold, and for a moment they were somewhere else, somewhere warm and safe and loved. And then the letter was folded away and the mountain was still there, white and silent and deadly all around. That gap between the world in the letter and the world in the foxhole was almost too wide to bear, and many men carried the strangeness of it, the sense of having been somewhere no one back home could ever imagine for the rest of their lives. Look at the arithmetic of it, and one fact stands out above the rest. In most battles, the enemy's weapons are what fill the aid stations. Here, the cold rivaled the enemy as a taker of men. Alongside those hit by bullets and shells were thousands upon thousands laid low by frostbite and the freezing air, feet and hands and faces destroyed by the temperature alone, men taken out of the fight without a single shot aimed at them. To face a battle in which the very air is one of your deadliest enemies, in which you can be crippled simply by standing still in the wrong place too long, is to face something few soldiers in history ever have. That is the measure of what this place was, and there was no rotation out of it, no warm camp to cycle back to for a few days' rest, no relief. For the length of the ordeal, you were in all of it, the cold and the fighting and the marching and the hunger. Without pause, running on less sleep and less food than a body can properly survive on, and expected to fight and think and endure anyway. That kind of sustained strain with no end in sight and no relief coming is one of the hardest things a human being can be asked to bear. And these men bore it not for hours, but for weeks, in the worst conditions imaginable, and kept fighting the whole time. So let us finally answer the question we began with. Why wouldn't you survive here? Not because you are weak, and not because you lack courage. You would not survive because this place brought together two apex predators at once and set them both on you. The cold, patient and endless, freezing your weapon and your food and your blood and your flesh. And the enemy, vast in number, master of the night and the high ground, needing almost nothing and going almost anywhere. Surrounded, cut off, outnumbered, frozen, with a single narrow road to the sea and an army holding every ridge above it, you faced a combination of enemies that should, by every reasonable measure, have finished every man who stood on that plateau. And yet, here is the part that should stay with you longest. Men did survive. Not because the odds spared them, but because they endured what should not have been endurable. They held their frozen holes through the screaming nights. They climbed the icy ridges to clear the way, again and again, on feet that were freezing inside their boots. They carried their wounded and their dead down that entire terrible road and would not leave a single man behind. They fought their way out through an army many times their size, in the worst cold they had ever known, and they reached the sea. When you weigh what this place threw at them, the wonder is not how many were lost. The wonder is that any of them walked off that mountain at all. That is why these stories matter, and that is why we tell them here. The men who survived this came to be known by a proud and fitting name among those who understand what they did, the few who made it out of that frozen place. They are old now, and their number grows smaller every single year, and each of them carried the cold of that plateau in their bones and the faces of the lost in their memory for the whole of their long lives. The least we can do is remember what they endured on our behalf. So if this took you somewhere you have never been and let you feel even a fraction of the cold and the weight those young men carried, then do one thing before you go. Subscribe so the next story finds you, and share this with someone who still remembers. A story that is remembered is a life that is honored, and these are lives that deserve to be honored for as long as there is anyone left to listen. You come down off the mountain at last, out of the high frozen passes, and ahead of you is the sea and the ships and the first real warmth you have felt in longer than you can measure. Your feet may never be right again. Your hands are stiff and clumsy and slow, and you will carry this cold and these nights and these faces for the rest of your days. But you walked out. You held the line, you kept the road open. You carried your friends down off that plateau, and you lived to see the water. Behind you, the mountains stand white and silent and terrible, keeping the men who did not make it. And out here, on this frozen road coming down alive to the sea, that is as close to a victory as anyone gets.